I'm a 32-year-old woman, and for as long as I can remember, 20 years, to be exact, my mother has blamed me for ruining her body after giving birth to me. It wasn't just a passing joke or something she said once in frustration. No, this was a core part of her personality, a belief she carried like a badge of honor. She'd bring it up at family gatherings, while shopping, even in front of my friends. She'd pull at the loose skin on her stomach or gesture toward the stretch marks on her arms and sigh dramatically. "This is all because of you, Lauren," she'd say. "I had the perfect body before I got pregnant." If I ignored her, she'd repeat it. If I laughed awkwardly, she'd double down. There was no winning. My parents divorced when I was 12, and I lived with my dad after the court granted him custody. My mother had a drinking problem, nothing that would land her in rehab, but enough that she couldn't keep a job or take care of a kid. The judge saw that, and my dad, despite working long hours, got full custody. My mother, though, got something out of the divorce too: alimony. She hadn't worked in years and convinced the court that she was incapable of doing so. For 2 decades, my father has been paying her $2,500 a month. That money was supposed to support her because she claimed that pregnancy had permanently wrecked her ability to work. The way she talked about it, you'd think I had shattered her spine rather than just, been born. It was the foundation of her excuse. She was too broken to have a career, and my father had to foot the bill for the rest of his life. Meanwhile, I worked my way through college, got my degree, and landed a solid job as a paralegal in Chicago. I live in a small apartment, pay my own bills, and do what I can to build a stable life. My mother never congratulated me or showed any interest in my career. Her only concern was that I never asked her for money, because she had none to give. That was another thing she'd remind me of constantly, how poor she was and how hard life had been for her since she sacrificed everything to give birth. Then, about 5 years ago, something changed. She started dressing better, wearing more makeup, even carrying designer bags. At first, I assumed she had just learned to budget better or found some discount stores, but then I noticed other things. Her skin looked smoother, her lips fuller, her entire face seemed different. She denied getting work done at first, but I wasn't blind. Every time I visited, there was something new. At first, it was just Botox and a few minor tweaks, but then, suddenly she had a perfect nose, lifted brows, and suspiciously perky features for a woman pushing 60. I started wondering how she was affording it. Alimony barely covered rent, let alone a series of cosmetic procedures. Yet, as I dug deeper, I realized she had been receiving financial gifts from various sources, including an old friend she had never named and a suspiciously large payout from a personal loan that never needed to be repaid. When I asked, she got defensive, saying she had connections or that she deserved to feel beautiful after everything she'd been through. She never explained where the money actually came from, though. Then last Christmas, my dad and I were having a drink together, and he let out a frustrated sigh. He was 58, still working overtime to keep up with his bills, and hers. He'd never remarried, never moved on completely, and he was still paying for a woman who hadn't contributed to her own life in 2 decades. That conversation stuck with me. Something about the way my dad looked so exhausted, so resigned, made me angry. 2 months ago, I went to drop off a birthday card at my mother's house. I wasn't planning on staying long, but while I was there, I noticed a stack of unopened mail on the kitchen counter. I don't know what made me look, but I did. Right on top, in clear bold letters, were invoices from multiple plastic surgery clinics. I hesitated. I knew it was wrong to snoop, but curiosity got the better of me. I flipped through them quickly while she was in the bathroom. My heart pounded as I read the numbers, $45,000 worth of procedures over the last 3 years. And it wasn't just that she had spent that money. It was how she paid cash and something labeled as installments. I put everything back before she returned, but my mind was racing. This wasn't just her using some savings. This was something bigger. Later that night, I told my best friend Jess about it. She didn't even hesitate. "That's fraud," she said. "If she can afford plastic surgery, she can afford to work. You could use this against her." I had never thought about it like that. At work, I casually brought up alimony laws with one of the lawyers I worked with. I framed it as a hypothetical scenario. If someone's receiving alimony but hiding extra income or misrepresenting their financial situation, what happens? The answer was clear. If proof existed that they weren't financially dependent, the payments could be terminated. I sat with that information for a week before I made my decision. I went back to my mother's house a few days later, this time with a plan. While she was distracted on the phone, I quietly took out my phone and snapped pictures of every invoice I could find. It was time for her to face reality. For 20 years, she had blamed me for ruining her body. Now, I was going to use those words, along with her own receipts, against her. You said, a week later, on a rainy Saturday, I drove to my mother's condo with the copied invoices tucked safely in my purse. The drive felt longer than usual, the streets slick with water, but my grip on the steering wheel was steady. I wasn't here to argue, or to listen to her usual guilt trips. I was here to call her bluff. She opened the door with a too-tight smile, her face frozen in a way that only Botox could achieve. Her arms wrapped around me, her sharp cheekbones pressing against my skin as she cooed, "Oh, Lauren, you look tired, work stress?" I stepped inside, shaking off the rain from my jacket, and immediately noticed the changes. A brand new leather couch sat against the wall, looking like something straight out of a high-end showroom. Draped casually over the armrest was a Gucci scarf, the signature logo glaring at me. My eyes swept across the room, new decor, polished surfaces, expensive candles that smelled like a luxury spa. None of this matched the sob story she had been feeding me and my father for years. I sat down, my fingers tracing the rim of the coffee cup she handed me. The warmth seeped through the ceramic, but I wasn't focused on the drink. Instead, I let my words slip out casually. "How do you afford all this on alimony?" Her smile didn't falter at first. "Oh, you know me," she said, waving a manicured hand, the diamond ring on her finger catching the light. "Thrift finds, good deals, a little gift here and there." But there was something off. The way her fingers twitched slightly, the way her eyes flickered toward the invoices still hidden in my purse. I leaned back. "Right. just good deals. She changed the subject quickly, shifting into familiar territory. You're still single, aren't you? I worry about you, Lauren. Always working, no time for a family. You don't want to end up alone, do you? It was a weak attempt at deflection, but I didn't bite. Instead, I reached into my purse, pulled out the stack of papers, and slid them across the glass coffee table. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. Explain this, I said. Her fingers hesitated before picking them up. Her eyes scanned the pages, and I watched as the blood drained from her face. For the first time in my life, she was speechless. Then just as quickly, the color returned, this time in a flush of anger. Where did you get these? This is private. Her voice was sharp as she snatched them up, holding them against her chest as if she could make them disappear. I didn't flinch. You told me for years that I ruined your body. But you've been fixing it for a long time, haven't you? I leaned forward. Where's the money coming from? Her lips curled into a smirk, but it didn't reach her eyes. You think you're so clever, don't you? She sneered. Digging through my life like some kind of detective? She still hadn't answered the question. I didn't back down. Dad has been paying you for 20 years because you told the court you couldn't work. Meanwhile, you've spent over $45,000 on plastic surgery. I gestured to the papers she clutched. That's fraud, Mom. For a split second, her face twisted into something ugly before she smoothed it over again. It's not what you think, she said quickly. An old friend helped me out, loaned me the money. It's not like I stole anything. Who? She hesitated. Just someone who wanted to help me feel better about myself. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. So, you took a loan for self-esteem, but you can't work? That's the excuse you're sticking with? Her expression hardened. You don't understand what I've been through, she snapped. I gave up everything for you. I sacrificed my life, my body, my career. I cut her off before she could launch into another rant. You sacrificed nothing? I shot back. You spent 2 decades making me feel guilty for something that was never my fault. And Dad? He's been killing himself working overtime to support you while you sit here, lying to the court and living like this. I gestured around the condo. Her hands trembled, but her pride wouldn't let her back down. You're ungrateful, she spat. After everything I've done for you, I stood up, grabbing my bag. This ends now, I said, voice steady. Dad's going to a lawyer. You can figure out what happens next. She shot up from her seat. You wouldn't. But the door was already closing behind me. That night, I called my father. I laid it all out. Everything I had found, everything she had said. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone before he finally spoke. I knew she was up to something, he said quietly. Let's talk to a lawyer. 3 days after the fight at my mother's condo, my dad and I met with his divorce attorney, Karen. Her office downtown was cluttered with legal books and stacks of case files, the kind of place where things got done, not just discussed. She glanced up from her computer when we walked in, then gestured for us to sit. I reached into my bag and pulled out the photocopies of my mother's plastic surgery invoices, placing them on her desk. She picked them up, flipping through them with quick, practiced eyes. $45,000 in procedures over 3 years, she muttered, tapping a manicured finger against the pages. If we can prove she has additional sources of income beyond alimony, whether from undisclosed work, financial gifts, or fraudulent claims, this could lead to a case for terminating the payments. She leaned back in her chair, considering. Alimony is awarded based on need. If your mother misrepresented her financial situation, we can argue she no longer qualifies. As she spoke, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. A message from my mother. You're a spiteful child. I'll sue you for stealing my mail. I turned my phone so Karen could see. She smirked. She's bluffing. You didn't take originals, just copies. There's no case for mail theft. She waved a hand dismissively. She's just rattled because she knows what's coming. Even so, I saved the message, just in case. My dad shifted in his chair. I can pull bank statements, he said, running a hand over his face. See if there's a pattern. If the alimony went straight into funding this instead of living expenses, that's got to count for something. Karen nodded. Good idea. We need to build a clear picture of her financials. If she has hidden income sources, we can subpoena her records. Later that evening, my cousin Tara called me out of nowhere. I hadn't spoken to her in months, but she jumped straight into it. Your mom's been telling everyone you're bullying her over personal choices, she said. She's making it sound like you're trying to ruin her life. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. And people believe her? Not everyone, she said. Aunt Linda's on her side, though. She keeps saying family shouldn't air dirty laundry. Of course. My mother had always known how to manipulate certain people. Just thought you should know, Tara added. I think you're doing the right thing. She's always been like this. Hearing that someone in the family saw through her was a small comfort, but I knew this wasn't the end. My mother wasn't the type to back down quietly. The next morning, I stopped by a coffee shop near my office, running on too little sleep and too much stress. As I waited for my order, a chatty client from the law firm spotted me. Hey, Lauren, right? She said, tilting her head. You seem a little off? Everything okay? I forced a smile. Just a long week. She nodded sympathetically, launching into small talk, but my mind was elsewhere. The whole situation was bleeding into every part of my life. That night, I went to my best friend Jess's apartment, collapsing onto her couch with a glass of wine. She's making it seem like I'm the villain, I muttered, swirling my drink. Jess didn't hesitate. She's mad because you caught her. Keep going. This is justice. She was right. My mother had spent years making me feel small, guilty, like I owed her something. But now the truth was coming out. Feeling a surge of determination, I grabbed my laptop and started digging. I typed the name of the surgeon from the Invoices into Google. His clinic's website was sleek, high-end, boasting exclusive procedures and confidential payment plans. Then I found something interesting, mentions of cash-only discounts and alternative payment options. That hinted at something bigger. If my mother had been paying in cash, where was it coming from? If she had an unreported income source, that could be a game changer in court. A memory tugged at me, something buried deep. I stood up, went to my bedroom closet, and pulled down an old box filled with notebooks. Inside, I found what I was looking for, a teenage journal. I flipped through the pages, skimming over old rants and scribbled thoughts until I found the entries. Page after page of me venting about my mother's constant body shaming, how she would poke at her stomach and remind me, "This is your fault." Even back then, I had written about how obsessed she was with fixing herself, always talking about what she deserved. I snapped a few photos of the pages with my phone. Maybe they wouldn't hold legal weight, but they were proof that this had been her mindset for years. Then, just as I was about to put the journal away, my phone rang. It was my dad. His voice was tight. I found something. I sat up. "What?" "Old transfers," he said. "Small amounts at first. A couple $100 here and there, but it adds up. The payment started years ago, going into an account I don't recognize. Not mine. Not ours. A separate account. Hidden money." I gripped the phone. "Karen needs to see this." There was a pause. Then my dad exhaled. "Yeah, let's take this to court." Over the next 2 months, my mother was served with a subpoena at her condo. Legal proceedings take time, but our lawyer reassured us that with the evidence we had, we were making solid progress. It was mid-morning, and she had probably been enjoying her overpriced coffee when the process server knocked on her door. Whatever peace she had was shattered the moment she realized what was happening. Less than an hour later, my phone rang. The caller ID flashed her name. I let it go to voicemail at first, but when she called again immediately, I answered. The moment I picked up, she was already yelling. Her voice was shrill, nearly unhinged. "You're trying to ruin me, Lauren. This is harassment." I let her rant for a few seconds, then calmly said, "You've been living a lie for years. This is just the truth catching up." Before she could launch into another fit, I ended the call and blocked her. That would be the last time she ever reached me directly. I blocked her number after the call, ensuring she couldn't contact me again. Minutes later, a text popped up from an old high school friend, Mike. He lived in the same complex as my mother and had seen the whole scene unfold. "Saw your mom outside, pacing like a maniac. She looked like she was arguing with herself. Something going on?" I just responded with, "Yeah, long story." That afternoon, my dad and I met with Karen again. She spread out the invoices, bank records, and financial statements across her desk, tapping a pen against the most recent discovery, an account my mother had kept hidden for years. The subpoena will force her to turn over these records," Karen explained. "She'll try to fight it, but given what we already have, the judge is likely to grant full access." My dad nodded. "And if we can prove she misused the alimony?" Karen didn't hesitate. "We end it." Later that evening, an unexpected text came in. My Uncle Jeff, my mother's own brother, reached out for the first time in years, heard about what's going on. "She's been mooching off the whole family for decades. If you need me to back you up, let me know." I hadn't expected that. My mother had always played the victim, making it seem like the entire world was against her. But apparently, even her own brother was tired of the act. The next day, I was out for lunch with Jess at a diner when I vented about everything. The subpoena, the financial mess, the way my mother was trying to paint me as the villain. I hadn't noticed the waitress hovering nearby until she leaned in while refilling our drinks. "Family trouble, Hugh?" she asked, eyebrows raised. I just gave a polite nod and changed the subject. This entire situation was already spreading further than I wanted. Then my mother tried her own move. Karen emailed me later that evening. Apparently, my mother's lawyer had sent over a cease and desist letter, claiming I had invaded her privacy by snooping through her financials. Karen's response? She laughed. "She doesn't have a case," she said over the phone. "This is a desperate attempt to scare you. Ignore it." The pressure was mounting, and then my dad found something else. He called late at night, voice tight. I just went through some old bank records. Right after the divorce, she pulled out $10,000 from our joint savings. She never disclosed it. That was fraud. Jess Ever, the investigator, decided to take a detour on her way home the next day and drove past my mother's condo. A few minutes later, she sent a picture, a sleek, new Audi parked in the driveway. I stared at my phone. Where had that money come from? That night I couldn't sleep. For the first time since this started, I wondered if dragging my family into this made me the bad guy. Was this just a petty fight, or was it justified? Then, an email from Karen came in. "She's fighting the subpoena," it read. But the judge reviewed the initial evidence. "He's leaning in our favor." This was far from over. 2 weeks later, my dad and I sat in a cramped Chicago courtroom, waiting for the hearing to start. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made every shuffle of paper and creak of a chair feel louder than it should. My dad tapped his fingers against his knee, his face unreadable. Karen sat beside us, flipping through her files, calm as ever. Then my mother walked in. She had dressed for the occasion, a tailored navy suit, hairstyled to perfection, makeup flawless. To anyone else, she looked like a dignified, wronged woman, but I knew better. This was the performance of a lifetime. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, adjusted her glasses and wasted no time. "This is a petition to revise alimony based on new financial evidence. Let's begin." Karen stood, smoothing her blazer. "Your Honor, we will present clear evidence that the recipient of these payments, MS, Randall, has misrepresented her financial need, engaged in luxury spending, and maintained an undisclosed account while continuing to accept alimony under false pretenses." She placed the invoices and bank records on the table for the court clerk to collect. "This is a timeline of my client's payments over 20 years, contrasted with MS. Randall's spending habits, including elective cosmetic procedures totaling $45,000, a luxury vehicle purchase, and undisclosed withdrawals from a joint account post-divorce." My mother's lawyer barely blinked before launching into his defense. "Your Honor, these procedures were necessary for my client's well-being. As a single mother, she struggled with body image issues caused by pregnancy-related changes. These surgeries were medical in nature, aiding her mental health. Karen didn't even look surprised. Instead, she pulled out a new document. Interesting. Because according to these invoices, the first of these procedures was performed 15 years after her pregnancy. Her child was a teenager when she started undergoing these necessary surgeries. The room went quiet. My mother crossed her arms, her lips pressed together. Her lawyer adjusted his tie, flipping through his notes, but Karen had already moved on. Let's hear from Mr. Randall. She nodded at my dad, who stood and took the witness stand. My dad didn't hesitate. His voice was steady, calm. For 2 decades, I paid alimony because I was told my ex-wife was unable to work. I believed her. She said her body was ruined, that she couldn't hold a job, and that supporting her was my responsibility. Meanwhile, I worked overtime, lived paycheck to paycheck, while she took vacations and drove better cars than I ever could. He didn't look at my mother once. Then it was her turn. She took the stand, wiping at dry eyes, her voice trembling just enough to sound rehearsed. This is about my daughter's hatred for me, she started. She's punishing me. I was a single mother. I sacrificed for her. And now she's trying to take away the little I have. She sniffled. A perfect show of martyrdom. Karen stood up. MS? Randall, do you own a 2023 Audi? Silence. Do you? My mother shifted in her seat. It's a gift. From whom? More silence. Karen turned to the judge. Your Honor, we also have testimony from a family member who can confirm MS. Randall has openly bragged about beating the system to continue receiving alimony. The doors opened, and my Uncle Jeff walked in. My mother's head snapped up, her face twisting in shock. Jeff was calm as he took the stand. At a family barbecue 2 years ago, my sister said, they're never gonna take my checks. I'll say whatever I have to say. She laughed about it. The judge raised an eyebrow, taking notes. Then it was my turn. I stepped forward, hand steady. For 20 years, my mother told me I ruined her body, I said. She made it my fault. She used that excuse to take money from my father while living a better life than he ever did. My entire childhood was a reminder that I was her burden. Except, as you can see, she's been more than comfortable. I met my mother's eyes. She used my birth as a paycheck, not a hardship. The judge studied me for a moment before turning to Karen. I'll need to review MS. Randall's financials overnight before making a decision. Court is in recess. As we stood to leave, I felt my mother's glare burn into me. When I turned, she mouthed, this isn't over. Outside, my dad exhaled slowly, then pulled me into a quick hug. You did good, kid. I nodded, but I could see it in his face. He was drained. We both were. But this fight was almost over. The morning of the verdict, my dad and I walked into the courtroom running on nothing but bad coffee and exhaustion. Neither of us had slept much. The weight of everything, years of lies, manipulation, and financial strain, hung between us. Karen, on the other hand, looked well-rested and confident as she shuffled through her notes. The judge took her seat and wasted no time. After reviewing the evidence presented, I find that MS. Randall has willfully misrepresented her financial need while continuing to collect alimony. She adjusted her glasses, then looked directly at my mother. Effective immediately, all alimony payments are terminated. The words hit like a hammer. My dad let out a long breath beside me, but my mother? She shot up from her chair so fast the bailiff took a step forward. This is an outrage. Her voice cracked through the room. My own daughter did this. I sacrificed everything, and this is how I'm repaid. The judge gave her a warning look, but she wasn't done. You ungrateful little. The bailiff moved in then, gently but firmly steering her toward the exit. She shook him off, snatching up her designer bag before storming out, heels clicking angrily against the tile. The moment the doors slammed behind her, the tension in the room eased. Karen leaned in close, voice low. We could sue for back payments, she murmured. Given the years of fraud, we might be able to recover some of what your father lost. My dad sat back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his face. I just want this to be over. I didn't blame him. He had spent 2 decades paying for a lie. The thought of dragging it out further felt exhausting, even if the money was rightfully his. After court, Dad took me and Jess out for lunch, greasy diner burgers and fries. He lifted his beer and toasted to Lauren, who stood up for what's right. Jess clinked her glass against mine, beaming. I smiled, but there was something hollow about it. The win was clean cut, but the fallout was already starting. Later that evening, my phone buzzed. Aunt Linda. I let it go to voicemail. When I listened to it, her voice was sharp with anger. You destroyed your mother, Lauren. I hope you're happy. This should have been handled privately, but instead, you humiliated her. She's family, and you've cut her off at the knees. Don't bother calling me again. One bridge burned. Then came the voicemail from my mother. Her voice was softer, but laced with something worse than anger, pure manipulative guilt. You'll regret this when I'm homeless, Lauren. You've taken everything from me. You're heartless. I deleted the message. Then I blocked her. The next morning, even strangers were talking about it. While grabbing my mail, my neighbor, a woman I barely knew, gave me a curious look. Hey, I heard about some court drama. A friend mentioned your family was in a lawsuit? The story was spreading. Jess, always one step ahead, sent me a link that afternoon. Look what I found. It was an old blog my mother had run years ago, long since abandoned, but still archived online. The posts were full of long, dramatic entries about how pregnancy had stolen her beauty and how she was on a journey to reclaim herself. It was all about her body, her suffering, her need to be whole again. It wasn't about me at all. I stared at the words, my stomach twisting. At night, I replayed the courtroom scene in my head. The moment my mother cried, the way she looked at me like I had betrayed her. The guilt started creeping in. Over coffee, my dad caught me staring off into space. She dug this hole, he said. Not you. Don't let her flip the script. I nodded, but I wasn't sure it was that simple. That afternoon, Karen called. If she keeps harassing you, we can file a restraining order, she said. I think about it. I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure if I was ready to take that step. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. A week after the verdict, I was home when a frantic knock rattled my door. Before I even looked through the peephole, I knew who it was. I opened it to find my mother standing there, mascara streaked down her face, clutching a crumpled eviction notice in her hands. Her usual polished look was gone. Her hair was a mess, her clothes slightly wrinkled. She was in full performance mode. "I can't survive without that money, Lauren," she gasped, shaking the paper at me. "Please, you have to fix this." I didn't move. She kept going. "I have nowhere to go. Your father ruined my life, and now you're finishing the job." For years, I would have let this guilt sink in, but not anymore. I kept my voice steady. "You had 20 years to figure things out. I'm done carrying your guilt." Her eyes flashed, and just like that, the tears stopped. Her expression hardened. "You're heartless." A door creaked behind me. My downstairs neighbor, a middle-aged woman who mostly kept to herself, was watching the scene unfold. She locked eyes with me briefly, then slipped back inside. Minutes later, my phone buzzed. "Neighbor, everything okay?" "She's really loud." I texted back a quick "all good," though I wasn't sure how true that was. By the next morning, the family gossip train had taken off. Uncle Jeff called, voice laced with exhaustion. "She's been crashing on my couch, going on and on about how you ruined her. I told her to stop, but she won't let it go." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "She'll find someone else to latch onto soon." Jeff scoffed. "Not at my place. She's out by tomorrow." Later that day, on a whim, I grabbed an old necklace my mother had given me years ago and took it to a pawn shop. It had always seemed too flashy, too expensive for someone who supposedly struggled financially. The appraiser barely glanced at it before giving me a number, $2,000. It clicked then. She had used alimony money on luxury items, gifts, things to make herself feel important. Meanwhile, my dad had been working overtime to cover her lifestyle. That evening, Jess came over with pizza and zero patience for my hesitation. "She showed up at your apartment. She's spiraling. File the restraining order." I shook my head, but she pressed on. "Lauren, this is getting worse. Do it before she does something you can't ignore." I didn't argue, but I didn't agree either. Later that night, I was digging through an old shoebox when I found something I hadn't seen in years, a card my mother had given me on my 16th birthday. "I'm sorry for the harsh words I've said about you being born. I never meant them." Proof. She had known all along that what she said was cruel. And yet she had kept doing it for years, using me as an excuse for her own choices. The next morning, my dad and I met for coffee. He stirred his drink slowly, watching me. "I think we dropped the back pay lawsuit," he said finally. "She's got nothing left to give." I nodded. It wasn't about the money anymore. We had already won. But my mother wasn't finished. That afternoon, Tara texted me. "Tara, she's asking everyone for money, saying you destroyed her. Some cousins are falling for it." I clenched my jaw. Of course she was playing the victim. Then Karen called. "Her lawyer filed a motion to appeal the ruling," she said. "It's a long shot, but it could drag things out." I barely had time to process that when my phone buzzed again. Another voicemail. I pressed play, expecting more fake sobbing. Instead, her voice was low, sharp. "I'll make you pay for this." Not pleading, not sad. A promise. I stared at my phone for a long moment. Then I picked it up and called Karen back. Filed the restraining order. 2 days after my mother's last voicemail, I walked into the county courthouse and filed the restraining order. The clerk slid the paperwork across the desk, pointing where to sign. My hands didn't shake until the last signature. By that afternoon, the judge approved a temporary order, 30 days, no contact, pending a full hearing. It was done. For the first time in weeks, my phone stayed silent. No calls, no texts, just an eerie, unfamiliar quiet. That night, my dad came over with takeout. He looked more relaxed than he had in months, his shoulders looser, his face less drawn. As we ate, he let out a slow breath and shook his head. "It's finally over, Lauren. She can't touch us now." The weight of it all sat between us. 20 years of manipulation, guilt, and financial strain, gone with a judge's ruling. A few nights later, Jess gathered a small group for dinner. Just old friends. A quiet toast to new beginnings. No speeches, no deep conversations, just laughter and easy company. A reminder that there was life beyond this mess. Then, Uncle Jeff sent a message. "Jeff, she's gone. Packed up, moved in with some friend of hers. She's still whining about you, but I'm done playing hotel." That was that. She had burned the last bridge. A week later, Karen called with the final update. Her lawyer withdrew the appeal, she said. "She's out of money and out of options. Case closed." I sat back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. It was really over. Karen sent over one last report, bank statements and subpoenaed financials. Buried in the records, there it was, a savings bond from my grandparents, cashed out years ago. She had used every cent on her fixes. While she cried broke to my father, she had been sitting on money. That evening, I went out to my dad's backyard with a match and a stack of old notebooks. My teenage journals. I flipped through them one last time, reading the words of a younger me. Every "you ruined me" rant from my mother, every time I wrote about feeling like an anchor dragging her down. Then I tossed the pages into the fire and watched them curl into ash. A few days later, a cousin forwarded me a screenshot from a family group chat. My mother's last jab. "Mom, Lauren won't get a dime when I'm gone." As if I had ever wanted it. I blocked the number and went for a run the next morning. For the first time in years, I wasn't running from something. I was running toward it. Looking back, the irony was almost too perfect. She spent 2 decades blaming me for ruining her body. But in the end, it was her obsession with fixing it that brought her down. Justice doesn't get sweeter than that.